When we think of Hitler in the war, people generally think of Hitler at the Eagle's Nest, Eva Braun's home movies, or they think of him perhaps in the bunker in Berlin.
If you think World War II ended when the shooting stopped, think again. The war left behind a hidden map, a maze of sealed doors, secret tunnels, and lost concrete labyrinths buried beneath Europe's cities, forests, and fields. These are not the stories you heard in class. These are the bunkers the Nazis built and swore would never be found. Some of them are so well hidden that even local legends could only whisper about their existence. When modern explorers finally cracked them open, what they found inside wasn't just history, it was nightmare fuel. Fortress of Mimoyek, France. The story begins in the windswept fields of northern France, not far from the English Channel. For years, the earth here hid a secret, a sprawling underground fortress codenamed Bauvorhaben 711. Ordinary people passing by saw nothing, but hidden below, German engineers and thousands of forced laborers were busy constructing what Hitler hoped would be the weapon to end all weapons, the V3 London cannon. Picture this, a supergun designed to launch a relentless storm of shells directly into the heart of London, day after day, night after night. The plan was wild. 50 guns firing 3,000 shells every 24 hours, each one meant to turn the British capital into rubble. Even after the Nazis scaled down the design, they still aimed to send 600 shells an hour toward the city. What makes the fortress even more haunting is how the Nazis tried to keep it secret. They picked this spot for its geological shield, 30 meters of solid chalk overhead, and a location just far enough from the coast to keep Allied ships at bay. Deep below, workers carved out railway tunnels 600 meters long, and above them 5 enormous shafts angled downward to house the supergun barrels. 5,000 men worked 12-hour shifts in suffocating darkness. Germans, miners from the Ruhr, and thousands of enslaved Soviet prisoners. The Allies got wind of something, but thought it was a rocket base. Their bombing raids began in late 1943 and would grow more intense with each month. The most devastating attack came in July 1944, when the legendary Dam Busters dropped 16 earthquake bombs, cracking the fortress open and flooding the tunnels. Canadian troops finally captured Mimoyek in September 1944, but by then, the place was already a graveyard for dreams and for men. When Winston Churchill visited after the war, he ordered it demolished, calling it the most devastating attack of all. Today, Mimoyek is open to visitors, with monuments to both the fallen airmen and the prisoners who died here. But no monument can capture the unease of standing in a space that was designed for mass destruction on a scale Europe had never seen. These bunkers were more than just shelters. They were blueprints for an apocalypse. The deeper you go, the more you start to wonder, what kind of secrets could still be hiding down here, just out of reach? And if a gun this massive could stay hidden for decades, what else could Europe's fields be hiding? Maisy Battery, France. Hidden just inland from Normandy's beaches, the Maisy Battery spent over 60 years buried under wild brambles and farmers' fields, a forgotten fortress erased from the history books until a British historian named Gary Stern stumbled across a clue so small it almost seemed accidental, a hand-drawn map in a US veteran's uniform. This scrap of paper marked Area of High Resistance near Grand Camp Maisy. Most would have dismissed it, but Stern got obsessed. He tracked down old deeds and bought the land from 27 different owners before picking up a shovel. What emerged next rewrote D-Day history. Under the grass, the Maisy Battery turned out to be a sprawling network of bunkers, ammunition stores, and artillery emplacements. 14 massive guns in total, including 155mm French howitzers and a line of 105mm pieces, all hidden in a maze of 3 kilometers of trenches. There were radar centers, a hospital, officers' quarters, and even an underground city, all positioned below ground level so that Allied reconnaissance couldn't see a thing. While most eyes were on the infamous Pointe du Hoc, the Germans kept Maisy quietly firing, launching shells onto Utah and Omaha beaches for 3 days after the landings. American Rangers didn't even know it existed until they practically stumbled into a close-quarters firefight inside the bunkers. eventually seizing the complex after hours of desperate combat. When they finally secured the battery, the Americans found over 180 tons of ammunition stacked inside, enough to keep shelling the Allies for weeks. What's almost stranger is how easily history forgot Maisy. Decades passed, and all that firepower was left to rot. When the site was uncovered, it was like cracking open a time capsule. Bunkers filled with rusted helmets, gas masks, and scorched walls still blackened from gunfire. Some of the rooms were almost perfectly preserved, with evidence of hurried evacuations and firefights frozen in time. Now, archaeologists using LiDAR and radar are still mapping out new rooms. How many more of these hidden batteries are still buried across Europe, their secrets waiting to erupt into the daylight? And how much history has been rewritten simply because we forgot where to look? The hidden Nazi bunkers of Denmark. If you ever take a walk along Denmark's windswept western coast, you might trip over a chunk of concrete, not realizing you've just found the tip of a buried fortress. This country, once considered a backwater in Nazi plans, became a stronghold, with almost 7,000 bunkers built as part of the infamous Atlantic Wall. In 2008, nature itself decided to reveal some secrets when storms ripped away sand dunes near Huvig Beach, exposing a cluster of untouched bunkers that had been sealed since 1945. Local kids found the first entrance, and what archaeologists found inside felt less like a ruin and more like a snapshot straight out of a lost world. Inside the bunkers, they found personal belongings that hadn't seen daylight in over 60 years. There were tobacco pipes half filled with dried leaves, half-finished schnapps bottles, German uniforms with insignias still intact, vials of forgotten medicine, working radio sets, and even Hitler stamps. One expert called it Europe's own Tutankhamun's tomb, and for good reason. Everything was exactly where its last owner had left it. These discoveries led to an urgent scramble, with museums racing to preserve artifacts before souvenir hunters and looters moved in. Even now, conservationists are struggling to protect what's left, as some locals want to preserve the memory, while others argue that these reminders of occupation should be blown up. But these aren't the only secrets Denmark's coastline is hiding. The Tirpitz bunker, for example, now houses a museum after its transformation from fortress to exhibit hall, and Bangsbo Fort still displays the massive naval guns the Nazis once aimed at the sea. The Hirtshals Bunker Museum offers a glimpse into what it was like to walk through miles of interconnected tunnels, dug by men who never went home. The real twist? Most of these bunkers are still being found, hidden in forests, under fields, and even beneath city blocks. The more experts dig, the more they realize that Europe's Nazi past is far from fully uncovered. The next time a storm blows through Denmark, it might just tear away the sand and reveal another sealed room, with another story waiting to be told. What secrets still wait beneath the dunes? Wolf's Lair, Poland. Not far from the sleepy town of Kantrin, hidden among the dense forests of northeastern Poland, lies a site so soaked in paranoia that even its name still echoes with menace: the Wolf's Lair. This wasn't just another bunker, it was Hitler's primary command post on the Eastern Front. From 1941 to 1944, the Führer spent over 800 days behind these reinforced walls, shrouded by a camouflage so effective that Allied bombers never managed to take it out. To the outside world, it was just another patch of wild woods. But inside, the bunker complex was a world of its own. A fortified city carved into 250 hectares of pine and moss, guarded by rings of explosives, anti-aircraft guns, and a staff of thousands. But the real horror of the Wolf's Lair isn't just in its design, it's in what it witnessed. On July 20th, 1944, this bunker became the stage for one of the most infamous assassination attempts in modern history. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg slipped a briefcase bomb under the conference table, hoping to end the war by ending Hitler himself. The blast killed 4, but the Führer survived, protected by the thickness of the concrete, a fluke of fate, and the sheer relentless anxiety that seemed to infect every brick of this fortress. The failed plot unleashed a wave of brutal retribution. Thousands were arrested, and nearly 5,000 executed in the aftermath. When the Nazis finally abandoned the Wolf's Lair As the Soviets closed in, they tried to blow it up, but the walls refused to die. Even today, jagged ruins still crouch among the trees, a stark reminder that some secrets refuse to be buried. Years later, new horror emerged when construction workers uncovered human remains near the site, bones of concentration camp prisoners forced to work and die in the endless labor of Nazi engineering. It's easy to visit the ruins now, to walk the silent halls, but the sense of unease lingers. The forest has swallowed the worst of the scars, but the feeling that you're walking through the center of a machine built for domination, betrayal, and death never quite leaves. With each new discovery, the wolf's lair reminds us how thin the line between past and present can really be. And just when you think the darkness has faded, the woods seem to whisper that not everything has been found. Elbe II U-boat bunker, Germany. In the industrial sprawl of Hamburg's docks, you might expect to find warehouses, shipping cranes, and endless stacks of cargo containers, but hidden beneath the southern bank of the Elbe River lies something altogether stranger. The Elbe II U-boat bunker, a relic of Nazi ambition and underwater warfare. Constructed in 1941 out of 50,000 cubic meters of steel-reinforced concrete, the bunker was built to shield Germany's deadliest submarines from Allied bombs. Its walls, 8 meters thick in places, were meant to be impenetrable, a vault for the Navy's secret weapons. But fate intervened in a way no one predicted. 6 months after the war ended, British engineers demolished the central wall with a controlled blast, collapsing the roof and trapping the remaining submarines in an accidental tomb. What they created was a perfectly preserved time capsule of World War II naval technology, untouched and inaccessible for decades. It wasn't until 1985 that a trio of researchers dug their way inside, discovering rusted hulls, forgotten equipment, and eerie reminders of a battle that had ended 40 years before. The site quickly became a magnet for souvenir hunters who clawed their way through concrete to pry open hatches and salvage relics. Eventually, the German authorities decided enough was enough. The entire structure was filled with gravel and sealed. Today, it's a parking lot. You can stand on the surface and never know that, meters below your feet, lost submarines sleep in pitch darkness, preserved by accident and by the stubbornness of concrete. No tourist signs point to the location. The bunker's secrets are locked away, with only old photos and stories left to suggest what really lies beneath Hamburg's busy streets. If a random parking lot can conceal that much wartime history, what else is hidden right under our noses? Holgangsanlage Tunnels, Jersey. Travel to the Channel Islands, and you'll find a landscape shaped as much by war as by weather. Nowhere is this clearer than Jersey, where the Nazis dug a labyrinth beneath the island that still shocks even the most hardened historians. The Holgangsanlage tunnels, German for cave passage installations, stretch hundreds of meters into the island's rocky hillsides, built by forced labor starting in 1941. These weren't simple bomb shelters. They were an entire world carved from stone. An underground hospital, barracks, storage depots, and command centers, all connected in a warren so extensive that only parts have ever been fully mapped. It's easy to see the numbers and miss the human cost. Over 5,000 workers, most of them prisoners ripped from their homes across Europe, forced to dig and haul through endless days and nights. Russian and Ukrainian laborers in particular suffered terribly. Many died from hunger, exhaustion, and brutality, their graves unmarked, their stories nearly erased. As Allied forces drew closer in 1944, the Nazis turned the tunnels into a casualty clearing station and last resort hospital, filling the underground wards with the wounded and dying. After liberation, the tunnels became a museum, preserving the horrors and ingenuity of war in a permanent exhibition. Today, tourists can walk the halls and stand in the old operating theatre, imagining what it must have felt like when the bombs fell and only rock separated life from death. But there are corners of the complex that remain unexplored. Sealed rooms, unfinished shafts, artifacts locked away since the last day of occupation. Every year, new discoveries add to the story, making it clear that Jersey's tunnels are still keeping some of their darkest secrets. What else could be waiting behind those sealed doors? And how many stories of survival and suffering have we yet to uncover? Vinegut I, Germany. Tucked away in the dense Bavarian forests near Mühldorf am Inn, Vinegut I stands as one of the Third Reich's strangest and most sorrowful engineering projects. Unlike most Nazi bunkers, this was never a military command post. It was a factory designed to churn out the most advanced jet engines of the war, hidden deep underground to protect it from Allied bombs. What set Vinegut I apart wasn't just its purpose, but its construction. The Nazis, desperate and innovative, built enormous gravel mounds and poured 3 meters of reinforced concrete across the top, creating giant arches they'd later excavate from beneath. It was meant to be fast, secret, and nearly indestructible. But the story of Vinegut I is not a tale of technology or efficiency. It's a story of forced labor and horror. Over 10,000 workers, mostly concentration camp prisoners and Soviet POWs, were pushed past the breaking point in its construction. More than 3,000 died here, victims of exhaustion, disease, and SS brutality. Those too frail to keep working were simply sent to Auschwitz, their lives traded for an industrial dream that never even became reality. By April 1945, only 7 of the planned 12 concrete arches had been finished, and the massive factory never produced a single operational Messerschmitt Me 262 engine. When the Americans arrived, cranes and tools were abandoned mid-job, as if the entire complex had simply been frozen in time. US engineers later detonated explosives to collapse much of what remained, but one arch still stands as a grim monument, a concrete skeleton looming over a forest that remembers everything. Today, visitors find little more than ruins and memorial plaques, but beneath the moss and silence, Vinegut I still hums with the echo of machinery and the ghosts of thousands who never left. Blockhouse Depeelle, France. Northern France is dotted with scars from World War II, but few are as imposing or as mysterious as the Blockhouse Depeelle. This massive concrete fortress rises from the woods near Saint-Omer, an immense monolith that was once intended to be the world's first operational V2 rocket assembly and launch site. Its dimensions are staggering. Walls up to 5 meters thick, ceilings as high as a 10-story building, and enough reinforced concrete to build an entire city block. The Nazis meant business here. Their vengeance weapon program was supposed to rain terror on London, and Blockhouse Depeelle was meant to make that happen. But Allied intelligence quickly caught on. Operation Crossbow, one of the largest and most relentless bombing campaigns of the war, was unleashed to destroy the site before it could ever fire a single missile. B-17 flying fortresses pummeled the area with hundreds of tons of bombs, eventually smashing the structure beyond repair and flooding the tunnels beneath. The Germans abandoned their plans, leaving the half-completed complex to the advancing Allies. Today, visitors can wander its bomb-blasted halls, tracing the scars left by war, and exploring displays of V1 and V2 rocket components. The northwest face still bears the wounds of the bombing. Yet, for all its concrete bulk, what's most haunting about Blockhouse Depeelle is what was never finished. The echoing halls, abandoned machinery, and empty launch bays are less a monument to Nazi might than to their failure. Still, the stories linger of forced labor, of engineers who gambled on technological miracles, and of a war that nearly changed the face of the world. You can't help but wonder, if just a few more weeks had gone by, would history be different? Some mysteries are best left unsolved. B8, Burr Cristal, Austria. Hidden below the tranquil town of St. Jorgen and Gusen in Austria, the B8 Burr Cristal complex is the kind of place that makes the blood run cold. Established in March 1944, this sprawling network of bomb-proof, gas-tight tunnels covered 50,000 square meters and served as the nerve center for Nazi Germany's most advanced weapon, the Messerschmitt Mimoyek 262 jet fighter. The pressure to build here was intense. Allied bombs pounded Germany's surface factories, so the Nazis retreated underground, turning the countryside into a maze of horror. B8 Burr Cristal wasn't just big, it was brutal. over 10,000 slave laborers, mostly prisoners from the nearby Mauthausen-Gusen concentration camp, were forced to dig, build, and assemble hundreds of jet fuselages every month. Conditions in the tunnels were so horrific that prisoners averaged less than 4 months' survival. Death came from overwork, starvation, disease, and the constant threat of SS violence. Every day, 100 prisoners died in darkness, and those who lived saw only dust, concrete, and the ever-present knowledge that they might be next. When the Americans finally liberated the facility in May 1945, they found it 85% complete, ready to change the course of the war, but brought to a halt by its own brutality and the pace of history. After the war, the Soviets dismantled the last of the machinery and destroyed key parts of the tunnel system, trying to erase the knowledge as quickly as possible. Today, parts of the complex can be toured, but much remains sealed, left as a silent warning. There's an uneasy feeling that not every secret has been told, and as the years pass, the shadows only grow longer. Middlebaldora Camp, Germany. If you think bunkers are just about concrete and weapons, Middlebaldora will shatter that illusion. Buried deep inside the Konstein mountain near Nordhausen, this facility started as a subcamp of Buchenwald, but soon evolved into a death factory with a singular purpose: building Hitler's weapons of retaliation. The V-2 rockets and V-1 flying bombs meant to terrorize London and beyond. The story of Middlebaldora is as chilling as anything in the Nazi record. Tens of thousands of prisoners, mostly political captives and Jews, were forced to live and work in pitch-black tunnels, deprived of daylight and air for months at a time. They crammed into makeshift bunks, surviving on scraps, while SS guards watched for the slightest hint of sabotage, a crime that meant execution by public hanging. By late 1944, the underground rocket assembly lines were in full swing. Over 12,000 prisoners crowded the tunnels at any given time, producing up to 600 rockets a month. The price for this industrial miracle? An estimated 20,000 dead, killed by exhaustion, disease, beatings, or the cave-ins and explosions that haunted every work shift. Some prisoners risked everything to sabotage production, a defiance that was usually met with brutal reprisal. By the time the Americans liberated the camp, they found a scene that seemed torn from the heart of darkness itself: piles of bodies, the stench of death, and haunted survivors who barely remembered the sun. Today, Middlebaldora is a museum and memorial, a sobering testament to what unchecked cruelty can accomplish when paired with modern technology. As you wander the tunnels and see the rusted remains of the rockets, it's impossible not to feel the weight of the suffering that powered this place. The weapons were terrifying, but the real horror lay in what the Nazis were willing to do to build them. Battery Todd, France. Travel up the windswept cliffs of France's Pas de Calais, and you'll stumble across one of the most ominous fortresses ever built. Battery Todd, named for Fritz Todt, the Nazi engineer behind much of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. This installation was a nightmare for anyone crossing the English Channel. Its 4 Krupp 380mm guns, each housed in thick concrete bunkers, could fire shells all the way to the coast of England. The guns alone weren't what made Todd so legendary. It was the scale and ferocity of the defenses: concrete bunkers, underground tunnels, anti-aircraft batteries, and countless machine gun nests turned the place into a fortress that seemed impossible to storm. Yet, for all its firepower, Battery Todd's main legacy is one of fear and futility. It caused destruction in Dover, hundreds of civilian deaths, thousands of homes damaged, and the constant threat of annihilation. But its true horror lay beneath the surface. The bunker's tunnels doubled as prison cells, makeshift hospitals, and storage for the vast arsenals required to keep the guns firing. Allied bombing raids battered the area, but it took Canadian infantry and fierce close-quarters fighting to finally capture the complex in 1944. Today, the main bunker has been restored as a museum, with an original K5 railway gun outside, one of only 2 left in the world. Visitors can explore the tunnels, run their hands along bomb-scarred walls, and see relics of the brutal battle for the Channel coast. Yet, for many, the feeling that lingers is not awe, but unease. How many secrets are still buried in those tunnels, And what stories died with the men who built and defended this fortress? Siricourt V1, Bunker, France. In the rolling fields of northern France stands a concrete colossus that few people ever get to see up close, the Siricourt V1 bunker. The Nazis codenamed it Wasserwerk St. Paul, Waterworks St. Paul, hoping to fool Allied reconnaissance into thinking it was just another utility project. In reality, it was a fortress built to launch hundreds of V1 flying bombs at London. The construction method was both clever and audacious. Engineers built the roof first at ground level, then dug out the rest of the bunker beneath it, all while under the constant threat of bombing. Allied pilots quickly caught on. The Siricourt bunker became one of the most heavily bombed sites in Europe, pounded with thousands of tons of explosives before it was ever finished. By the time the Nazis abandoned it, the outside was nearly complete, but the interior was a concrete labyrinth, half excavated and filled with debris. The launch ramp facing England was removed by German POWs after the war, and the rest of the structure was left to rot, inaccessible to all but a handful of researchers and locals. What makes Siricourt so eerie is what never happened. It never launched a single V1 missile, yet its towering bulk remains a symbol of ambition and failure. Its presence on the landscape is a constant reminder of what could have been and what was narrowly avoided. When you pass by on the road, you can't help but shiver at the thought of what might still be hidden inside, sealed away beneath the fields and the weight of history. La Kupal France. Hidden beneath a colossal concrete dome, La Kupal stands as one of the most ominous reminders of Hitler's most dangerous ambitions. Constructed near Saint-Omer in northern France, this vast underground world was intended to be the launch site for a V2 rocket barrage that could have devastated London. The dome itself is a feat of engineering, 5 meters thick and wide enough to cover an entire city block. Nazi engineers began by building the dome at ground level, then excavated underneath to create a labyrinth of assembly halls, fuel stores, living quarters, and medical facilities. Trains carrying rockets and supplies could glide directly into the tunnels, allowing the Nazis to prepare for massive, hidden attacks even as bombs exploded overhead. Allied intelligence quickly realized the threat. Over 16 bombing raids, more than 4,000 tons of explosives hammered La Kupal, transforming the countryside into a moonscape and ultimately crippling the site before it became fully operational. But what was left behind is almost as chilling as what might have been. Liberation forces found abandoned rocket parts, blueprints, and evidence of forced labor so desperate it left scars in the stone. Today, La Kupal is a museum where visitors can walk through those dark tunnels, look up at the monstrous dome, and imagine a world that almost changed forever. Sometimes, history's most terrifying stories are the ones where disaster was narrowly avoided. Project Rza, Poland. Beneath the forested slopes of Poland's Owl Mountains lies one of World War II's greatest enigmas, Project Rza. This vast complex of tunnels and chambers, nearly 9 kilometers long, was carved out in total secrecy, its purpose lost to time and its construction fueled by the suffering of thousands of forced laborers. Original plans have disappeared, leaving only fragments of testimony and a network of haunted, unfinished halls. Theories abound. Was it to be Hitler's ultimate hideout, a secret research center, or a fortress for some devastating wonder weapon? Even 80 years later, nobody can say for certain. The price of this mystery was paid in human lives. Prisoners dug the tunnels with bare hands and primitive tools, many dying from exhaustion, starvation, or outright brutality. Only a small fraction of the intended project was ever completed, but the scale that remains is breathtaking. Massive arches, ventilation shafts, rails for underground trains, all hint at ambitions that went far beyond simple defense. To this day, adventurers searching these tunnels still report finding sealed rooms, unexplained artifacts, and sections so remote that few dare to enter. Some even speculate about hidden treasure or evidence of Nazi escape plans. Whatever the truth, Project Rza remains a shadowy monument to human ambition and the dangers of secrecy. Furbunker Berlin. At the heart of a crumbling empire, buried under Berlin's shattered gardens, the Furbunker stands as a monument to history's darkest final act. Built in stages with walls up to 4 meters thick, the bunker was the ultimate retreat, designed to withstand the apocalypse that Hitler had unleashed on the world. By the spring of 1945, it was no longer a command post but a tomb. Hitler, Eva Braun, Joseph Goebbels, and other members of the inner circle barricaded themselves below ground as Soviet artillery turned the city above into ruins. Paranoia, betrayal, and hopelessness filled the cramped corridors. On April 29th, Hitler married Braun in a grim ceremony. Within 24 hours, both were dead, their bodies burned by loyalists in the garden above. When Soviet forces finally breached the site, they found a scene stripped of evidence but heavy with the weight of history. Burned papers littered the floor. Personal effects lay abandoned in the rush to escape or surrender. In the years that followed, the Soviets demolished most of the structure, erasing all but a faint mark on Berlin's landscape. Today, the location is nearly anonymous, hidden beneath modern apartments and marked only by a simple plaque. Yet the shadow cast by the Furbunker endures, a chilling reminder that even the most tightly sealed secrets can change the course of history, and some endings, however well buried, never truly fade. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've just scratched the surface of Europe's darkest mysteries. From concrete nightmares to tunnels where the echoes still haven't faded, these bunkers are more than relics. They're reminders of what can happen when secrecy and ambition run unchecked. If you want more stories that history textbooks won't touch, hit subscribe, share your theories in the comments, and stay curious. Because the past isn't finished with us, not by a long shot.